Black twins blocked from charter flight. Their call to owner stuns crew. The murmur of voices in the small airport terminal fell silent as James and Julian Carrington strode through the sliding glass doors. At 6'3" with matching tailored navy suits and identical close-cropped hair, the 35-year-old twins commanded attention without trying. James adjusted his burgundy tie while Julian checked their boarding passes on his phone. "Flight's on time," Julian murmured. "Should be wheels up in 40 minutes." James nodded, his eyes scanning the waiting area. Several passengers glanced up, then quickly away. He'd grown accustomed to the look's curiosity, sometimes admiration, occasionally something less pleasant. Today, they couldn't afford any complications. They were already cutting it close for the meeting in Chicago. At the premium charter desk, a young woman with a blonde ponytail and a too-bright smile greeted them. Her name tag read Melissa. "Good morning, gentlemen. How can I help you today?" Her tone was professional, but her fingers tapped nervously on the keyboard. "Good morning," Julian said. "We have a reservation on the 10:15 executive charter to Chicago, Carrington, party of 2. Melissa's smile faltered slightly as she typed. "Let me just check that for you." Her eyes darted between the screen and the twins. "I'm sorry, but I'm not seeing a reservation under that name for today's flight." Julian frowned, pulled up the confirmation email, and turned his phone toward her. "Reservation number CHT4872, confirmed yesterday." She squinted at the screen. "Yes, I see the confirmation, but—" She glanced over her shoulder toward a glass office where a middle-aged man in a pilot's uniform was watching them. "If you could just give me a moment, please." As she hurried to the office, James turned to his brother. "Here we go again." Julian's jaw tightened. "Let's not jump to conclusions. When was the last time someone couldn't find our reservation?" James kept his voice low. "Denver, Atlanta. Different circumstances," Julian muttered, though the tension in his shoulders told a different story. Through the glass, they could see Melissa engaged in animated conversation with the pilot. The man shook his head firmly, glancing in their direction with a frown. Melissa returned, her professional smile now strained. "I'm so sorry, gentlemen, but there seems to have been a scheduling error. Captain Mercer informs me that today's flight is fully booked." "Fully booked." Julian repeated. "We made this reservation 3 days ago and received confirmation yesterday. How exactly does a confirmed reservation disappear overnight?" "Sometimes our system has glitches," she offered weakly. James stepped forward. "Is there another flight we could take? We have an important meeting in Chicago at 2 p.m. I'm afraid all our executive charters are fully booked today. We could possibly get you on a commercial flight, though that would be later this afternoon." "That won't work," Julian said. "The meeting can't be rescheduled." James scanned the nearly empty waiting area. "Doesn't look fully booked to me." Melissa's cheeks flushed. "The other passengers haven't arrived yet." "May I speak with your supervisor?" Julian asked, his voice calm but firm. "Captain Mercer is handling all scheduling today, and he's about to begin pre-flight checks." James pulled out his phone. "Then I'd like to speak with the owner of Pinnacle Charter." Melissa's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, Mr. Whitman isn't available. He's not even in the state today." "I have his number," James said, already scrolling through his contacts. Melissa glanced nervously at the glass office, where Captain Mercer was now watching them intently, arms crossed. "Sir, I don't think," but James was already pressing the call button, holding Melissa's gaze as he lifted the phone to his ear. The moral question hung in the air. How far should one go to confront what appeared to be discrimination? Was escalation the right approach, or would it only reinforce stereotypes about angry black men? 3 rings, then a click. "Robert Whitman." "Mr. Whitman, this is James Carrington. My brother Julian and I are at your Phoenix terminal trying to board our confirmed charter to Chicago, but your staff is telling us our reservation has mysteriously disappeared and the flight is suddenly fully booked." There was a pause. "James Carrington, from Carrington Capital?" "The same." A longer pause. "Put Captain Mercer on the phone. Now." James handed his phone to the now pale-faced Melissa. "Mr. Whitman would like to speak with Captain Mercer." What happened next would change everyone's understanding of power, prejudice, and presumption, a chain of events that would force each person involved to confront their deepest assumptions about others and themselves. Captain Richard Mercer had been with Pinnacle Charter for 15 years. At 53, with salt and pepper hair and the confident bearing of a former military pilot, he ran his flights with precision and authority. He prided himself on maintaining the exclusive atmosphere that Pinnacle's wealthy clientele expected. When Melissa had shown him the reservation for J. Carrington, he'd immediately pictured one of their regular clients, Jonathan Carrington, a retired white banking executive who frequently used their service. Seeing 2 young black men at the counter had triggered an immediate suspicion of fraud or system error. "Those men don't look like our typical clients," he'd told Melissa. "Cancel the reservation. Say it was a glitch in the system." Now, watching Melissa approach with a phone in her trembling hand, Mercer felt a twinge of unease. "Sir, it's Mr. Whitman for you." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Mercer took the phone, straightening his posture as if Whitman could see him. "Robert, good morning. You have a situation. What the hell are you doing, Rick?" Whitman's voice was low but intense. "Do you have any idea who the Carrington twins are?" Mercer blinked, glancing through the glass at the two men standing at the counter. "Twins? James and Julian Carrington, founders of Carrington Capital. They manage over $3 billion in assets, and they're considering using Pinnacle as their exclusive charter service for all their executive travel." Mercer's stomach dropped. "I didn't realize. Fix this. Now." The line went dead. Mercer slowly handed the phone back to Melissa, his mind racing. He'd made an assumption, one that could cost the company millions in potential business. Worse, he'd revealed something about himself he wasn't ready to confront. He stepped out of his office, adjusting his uniform jacket. The Carrington twins watched him approach, their expressions unreadable. "Gentlemen," Mercer said, forcing a smile, "there's been a misunderstanding. Your reservation is confirmed, and we'd be honored to have you aboard. We're preparing for departure now." Julian raised an eyebrow. "What about the fully booked flight?" Mercer cleared his throat. "A miscommunication. Your seats are guaranteed." James handed Mercer a business card. "Our assistant sent your company our dietary preferences and seating requirements yesterday. Please ensure they've been accommodated." "Of course, Mr. Carrington. We'll take care of everything." As Mercer retreated to make arrangements, the twins exchanged a look that communicated years of shared experiences. "Same old story," James murmured. "Different day," Julian finished. In the quiet elegance of the Pinnacle Executive Lounge, Alina Whitfield sipped her herbal tea and checked her watch. At 62, with silver hair styled in a sleek bob and dressed in a Chanel suit, she exuded old-money confidence. Her husband, Senator Thomas Whitfield, was deep in conversation with their longtime friend, Douglas Bennett, a real estate developer flying to Chicago for the same charity gala. "I heard Pinnacle had a change in ownership last year," Bennett was saying. "Shame, it used to be such a reliable service." Senator Whitfield nodded. "Robert Whitman, Tech Money. The service is still excellent, but the clientele has become more diverse." Alina watched the door, wondering who else would be joining their flight. Pinnacle's small executive charters typically carried no more than 8 passengers, all carefully vetted. Over the years, she'd come to expect a certain caliber of traveler. When the Carrington twins entered, she noticed how conversations faltered. Her own assessment was immediate and layered with unconscious bias, expensive suits, but flashy watches. Professional demeanor, but they seemed too young for the executive level. She'd seen their type before: athletes or entertainers with new money, lacking the refinement that came with generational wealth. "Looks like we'll have interesting company today," Bennett murmured, just loud enough for the Whitfields to hear. Alina gave a tight smile. "Indeed." Captain Mercer appeared, now all hospitality. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're ready for boarding. Our flight to Chicago will take approximately 3 hours. We've prepared a light brunch and refreshments." As they moved toward the tarmac, Alina found herself walking beside Julian Carrington. "First time on Pinnacle?" she asked, her tone politely distant. "Yes," Julian replied. "We usually fly private, but our jet is undergoing maintenance." Alina's perfectly manicured eyebrow arched slightly. "Private, how interesting, and what brings you to Chicago?" "The Children's Hospital Foundation Gala," Julian said. "My brother and I are being honored for our contribution to the new oncology wing." Alina faltered for a moment. "The Hamilton wing? That was a $50 million donation." Julian smiled, noting her surprise. "Yes, cancer research is a personal cause for us. Our younger sister survived leukemia thanks to an experimental treatment at Children's." Before Alina could respond, they'd reached the aircraft. Inside, the luxurious cabin was arranged with plush leather seats and polished wood accents. James was already speaking with the flight attendant, reviewing what appeared to be a menu. Senator Whitfield had claimed his usual seat and was watching the interaction with poorly disguised suspicion. When James settled into the seat across from him, the senator leaned forward. "First time in Chicago?" he asked, the condescension in his voice barely disguised. James looked up from his phone. "No, Senator Whitfield, I keep an apartment in the Gold Coast district. And yourself, still in that colonial in Lincoln Park?" The senator's eyes widened slightly. We managed your portfolio restructuring last year," James said. "Carrington Capital, I believe we increased your returns by 18%. A heavy silence fell over the cabin as realization dawned on the Whitfields and Bennett. These weren't athletes or entertainers. These were the Carrington twins, the financial prodigies who'd built one of the most successful black-owned investment firms in the country. For the Carringtons, it was a familiar moment watching people recalibrate their assumptions, witnessing the mental gymnastics as prejudice collided with new information. As the engines roared to life, James met his brother's eyes across the cabin. The flight to Chicago would be short, but the journey of understanding was just beginning for everyone on board. The sleek charter plane cruised at 30,000 feet, a bubble of luxury isolated in the vast blue sky. Inside, an uncomfortable silence had settled after the revelations of the Carringtons' identity. Flight attendant Sophie Chen moved efficiently through the cabin, serving drinks with practiced grace, acutely aware of the tension. "Sparkling water for you, Mr. Carrington?" she asked Julian, placing a crystal glass on his table. "Thank you, Sophie," he replied, noting her name tag. "Perfect." Sophie had been with Pinnacle for 3 years and had seen her share of awkward situations among the wealthy elite. But the undercurrent here felt different, charged with something beyond the usual class tensions. Across the aisle, Eleanor Whitfield made a show of reviewing charity gala documents, occasionally glancing at the twins. Her husband, the senator, had retreated behind a newspaper. Douglas Bennett tapped away on his laptop, though his eyes frequently darted toward the Carringtons. James decided to break the ice. "Senator Whitfield, I understand you're chairing the hospital gala this year. My brother and I are looking forward to your remarks." The senator lowered his newspaper. "Yes, well, it's an important cause. The new oncology wing will serve families throughout the Midwest, particularly underserved communities," Julian added. "That was a key factor in our decision to fund the project." Eleanor closed her folder. "I must say your contribution was unexpected. Most of our major donors have long-standing connections to Chicago society." Julian smiled slightly. "Our connection is to the mission, Mrs. Whitfield. Our sister would have died without access to clinical trials at Children's." "Your sister," Eleanor said, realization softening her features. "I had no idea." "Kayla," James said. "She was diagnosed at 8. The doctors gave her 6 months. That was 20 years ago." A genuine smile crossed Eleanor's face. "That's remarkable. Is she well now?" "Completely cancer-free," Julian said. "She's a pediatric oncologist at Johns Hopkins." The conversation opened a small crack in the wall of assumptions. As Sophie served a light brunch, the cabin atmosphere shifted subtly. Douglas Bennett closed his laptop and leaned forward. "I understand Carrington Capital specializes in impact investing," he said. "My firm has been exploring opportunities in sustainable development." James nodded. "We've found that ethical investments and profitable ones aren't mutually exclusive. Though convincing old-school investors can be challenging," Julian added. Bennett chuckled. "I can imagine. Change comes slowly in certain circles." Senator Whitfield cleared his throat. "Speaking of change, I've been meaning to reach out about the Urban Development Initiative in South Chicago. Your perspective would be valuable." The twins exchanged a quick glance, recognizing the senator's pivot for what it was, an attempt to align himself with successful black businessmen now that he understood their status. "We'd be happy to discuss it," James said neutrally, "though we're quite selective about the projects we endorse." The message was clear. Their support couldn't be assumed or bought with superficial overtures. Captain Mercer's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some weather ahead. Please fasten your seatbelts as we may encounter turbulence." As if on cue, the plane shuddered slightly. Sophie quickly secured the cabin, checking that everyone was properly buckled in. When she reached Eleanor, she noticed the older woman's white-knuckled grip on the armrests. "Not a fan of turbulence, Mrs. Whitfield?" Sophie asked quietly. Eleanor forced a smile. "I've never enjoyed it, no." The plane dipped suddenly, causing Eleanor to gasp. Across the aisle, Julian observed her distress. "Try focusing on a fixed point," he suggested. "And slow, deep breaths. My sister taught me that trick during her treatments works for anxiety of all kinds." Eleanor looked surprised at the advice but nodded gratefully. "Thank you." As the turbulence increased, the usual barriers between passengers began to dissolve in the face of shared discomfort. Bennett gripped his armrests tightly, while the senator had gone notably pale. James remained calm, continuing to work on his tablet. "Is this normal?" Bennett asked no one in particular, his voice tight. "Just a weather system," James replied. "Captain Mercer has an excellent safety record." Sophie, securing herself in the flight attendant's seat, raised an eyebrow at James's knowledge. "We researched Pinnacle thoroughly before booking," Julian explained, catching her look, "including safety ratings and pilot experience." "Of course you did," the senator muttered, then looked embarrassed when he realized he'd spoken aloud. Julian turned to him. "Due diligence is the foundation of our business, Senator. We leave nothing to chance." The plane dropped again, more violently this time. A coffee cup slid across a table before Sophie could catch it, spilling onto the senator's newspaper. As she apologized and cleaned up the mess, Captain Mercer's voice returned. "Folks, we're diverting slightly to avoid the worst of this system. We'll be back on course shortly, but please remain seated with your belts fastened." In the small cockpit, Mercer and his co-pilot, Dave Simmons, worked efficiently through the weather challenge. But Mercer's mind kept returning to his earlier assumption about the Carringtons. "Those twins in back," he said during a calmer moment. "I nearly refused them boarding." Simmons glanced at him. "Why's that?" Mercer hesitated. "I thought they were trying to scam a free flight when I saw two young black men claiming a high-end reservation." "Jesus, Rick," Simmons said quietly. "I know, and then Whitman calls and tells me there's some hotshot financier's worth millions." "That shouldn't matter," Simmons pointed out. "Either they had a reservation or they didn't." The simple truth hit Mercer with unexpected force. He'd made a judgment based solely on appearance, a judgment that reflected biases he'd never fully acknowledged. Back in the main cabin, the turbulence was subsiding. Alina, having used Julian's breathing technique, was noticeably calmer. "Your sister," she said, "the doctor, she must be remarkable." Julian smiled. "Kayla's the real success story in our family. James and I just move money around. She saves lives every day." For the first time, Alina saw beyond her preconceptions to the human story behind the Carringtons' success. It wasn't just about money or status. It was about a family that had faced death and emerged with purpose. As the plane leveled out and Sophie resumed service, conversations throughout the cabin took on a different tenor. The initial tension hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had been punctured, allowing for something more authentic to emerge. None of them realized yet how their brief encounter at 30,000 feet would challenge their most deeply held beliefs and ultimately change the trajectory of all their lives. The turbulence had passed, but the conversation in the cabin continued to flow with unexpected candor. Douglas Bennett, who had initially seemed wary of the Carringtons, was now engaged in an animated discussion about urban development with Julian. "The problem with most revitalization projects," Julian was saying, "is they focus on property values instead of community preservation." Bennett frowned. "But without increasing values, how do you attract investment?" "By redefining success metrics," Julian replied. "Long-term resident retention, local business growth, educational outcomes, these create sustainable value that benefits everyone, not just developers." Bennett considered this. "I've never approached it that way." "Few do," Julian said, "which is why gentrification keeps displacing communities instead of uplifting them." Across the aisle, James was showing Alina photos on his phone. The silver-haired woman leaned closer, genuinely interested. "This is Kayla at her medical school graduation," James said, pride evident in his voice. "And this is the community clinic she started in Baltimore." Alina studied the images. "She has your smile and your determination, I imagine." James nodded. "She's the toughest one of us all. I remember when Thomas and I almost lost our son to meningitis," Alina said quietly. "It changes you as a parent, facing that kind of fear." For a moment, they were just two people sharing the universal experience of family love and worry, the external markers of race and class temporarily forgotten. Sophie moved through the cabin, refreshing drinks and observing the shifting dynamics with interest. In her 3 years at Pinnacle, she'd witnessed countless interactions among the elite business deals, political maneuverings, social climbing. But rarely had she seen such authentic exchange cut across the usual divisions. Senator Whitfield, who had been relatively quiet, finally rejoined the conversation. "Mr. Carrington, James, I understand your firm has been advocating for financial literacy programs in public schools." "It's one of our priorities," James confirmed. "Economic empowerment begins with education. I've been working on an education bill that might align with your interests," the senator continued. "Perhaps we could discuss it sometime." James regarded him coolly. "We're always open to meaningful partnerships, Senator, though we're selective about political affiliations." The senator's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, I understand." James held his gaze. "Do you, because your voting record on educational equity suggests otherwise?" A tense silence fell over the cabin. Alina looked uncomfortable while Bennett suddenly became very interested in his water glass. Sophie slowed her movements, eyes carefully averted. "My voting record reflects a complex balance of priorities," the senator said stiffly. "As does our investment strategy," James replied, "which is why we research thoroughly before committing our resources or our reputation." The senator's face flushed. "I don't appreciate your insinuation, Mr. Carrington." "It wasn't an insinuation, Senator. It was a clarification. There's a difference between networking for mutual benefit and performing allyship for optics. Julian, sensing the tension escalating, stepped in. What my brother means is that we value authenticity in our partnerships, the same way we appreciate that Mrs. Whitfield has been honest about her initial impressions of us. Alina looked startled. I don't think You didn't need to say it explicitly, Julian said gently. We've experienced it our entire lives, the surprise when people discover who we are and what we've accomplished, the recalibration of expectations. Alina had the grace to look embarrassed. I apologize There's no need to apologize for unconscious bias, Julian assured her. We all have them. The question is whether we're willing to recognize and challenge them. Douglas Bennett set down his glass. I admit when you two walked in, I made assumptions. I'd like to think I'm not prejudiced, but you didn't expect two young black men to be major philanthropists and financial leaders, James finished for him. That's not unique to you, Mr. Bennett. It's systemic. The senator, still bristling from James's earlier comments, shook his head. Not everything is about race. You've clearly done well for yourselves. Isn't that proof that the system works? Julian's expression remained calm, but his eyes hardened slightly. Our success doesn't disprove systemic inequality, Senator. If anything, it highlights it. For every story like ours, there are thousands of equally talented individuals who never get the opportunity because of structural barriers. What my brother and I have achieved, James added, came despite the system, not because of it, and it required resources and resilience that shouldn't be prerequisites for success. Captain Mercer's voice interrupted over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into Chicago in approximately 15 minutes. Current weather at our destination is clear skies and 72 degrees. As Sophie began preparing the cabin for landing, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: the charity gala, Chicago restaurants, weekend plans. But something fundamental had changed in the atmosphere. A veil had been lifted, allowing glimpses of the complex human beings behind the social masks. Alina touched Julian's arm as he passed to return to his seat. Thank you for your candor, Mr. Carrington. It's refreshing if occasionally uncomfortable. Julian smiled. Growth usually is, Mrs. Whitfield. The plane began its descent toward Chicago, where their paths would continue to intersect in ways none of them could yet imagine. For now, they were suspended between worlds, the rarefied air of privilege and the grounded reality of human connection. The real test would come when they touched down and returned to the structures and systems that had shaped their different lived experiences. As the city skyline appeared in the distance, James caught his brother's eye. Their silent communication acknowledged what they both knew. This flight was just the beginning of a much longer journey. The Pinnacle Charter touched down smoothly at Chicago Executive Airport, a small facility catering to private aircraft and wealthy travelers seeking to avoid the congestion of O'Hare. As the engines powered down, passengers began gathering their belongings, the brief intimacy of the flight already giving way to the usual social distances. Thank you for flying with us today, Sophie said as she opened the cabin door. Pinnacle hopes to serve you again soon. One by one, they disembarked. On the tarmac, Captain Mercer stood at attention, nodding to each passenger. When the Carrington twins approached, he stepped forward. Mr. Carrington, he addressed them, his expression serious. I owe you both an apology. The confusion with your reservation was entirely my fault, and it was based on an unacceptable assumption. James studied the pilot's face. What assumption was that, Captain? Mercer hesitated, then squared his shoulders. That you didn't belong on this flight, that you couldn't possibly be the J. Carrington on my manifest. Because, Julian prompted, though they all knew the answer. Because of how you look, Mercer admitted. Because you're young black men and I made a judgment about who belongs in certain spaces. It was wrong, and I'm sorry. The twins exchanged a glance. This kind of explicit acknowledgement was rare. We appreciate your honesty, Captain, Julian said finally. It takes courage to recognize bias. Though recognition is just the first step, James added. Real change requires action, Mercer nodded. I understand, and I intend to do better. As they moved toward the terminal, Senator Whitfield fell into step beside them. That was quite something, he remarked. Not many people would admit to racial profiling so openly. It's not about admitting it, James said. It's about changing it. Of course, the senator agreed quickly, which is precisely why I'd like to discuss my education initiative with you. Your perspective would be invaluable. James regarded him skeptically. Is this a genuine invitation for input, Senator, or an attempt to add diversity to your endorsement list? The senator flushed. That's rather cynical, Mr. Carrington. It's realistic, James countered. We've seen politicians court black business leaders for optics while continuing to support policies that harm black communities. I assure you my commitment to educational equity is sincere. Julian stepped in, his diplomatic nature balancing his brother's directness. We'd be happy to review your proposal, Senator. Our foundation has educational consultants who could provide substantive feedback. The senator seemed relieved. Excellent. I'll have my office send over the materials. Inside the terminal, Alina was engaged in conversation with Douglas Bennett. She brightened when she saw the twins. James, Julian, Douglas, and I were just discussing the gala seating arrangements. Would you consider joining our table this evening? I'm sure the hospital board would appreciate having the Hamilton Wing donors centrally located. The invitation was clearly an olive branch Alina's way of acknowledging the shift in her perception. We'd be honored, Mrs. Whitfield, Julian said warmly. As arrangements were confirmed and contact information exchanged, a sleek black Suburban pulled up outside. A driver in a dark suit emerged, holding a sign that read CARRINGTON. That's our ride, James said. If you'll excuse us. Alina touched his arm. Before you go, I wanted to ask about your sister's clinic in Baltimore. I sit on several foundation boards, and her work sounds precisely like the kind of initiative we should be supporting. For the first time that day, James's expression softened completely. I'll connect you. Kayla's always looking for partners who understand her vision. As they said their goodbyes, Captain Mercer approached once more, this time with Robert Whitman on his phone. Mr. Carrington, Mercer said, Mr. Whitman would like a word if you have a moment. James took the phone. Robert, we were just leaving. James, Whitman's voice came through clearly. I want to personally apologize for this morning's incident. It's completely unacceptable and doesn't reflect Pinnacle's values. Doesn't it? James challenged, because it seemed quite systematic. A pause. You're right, and that's precisely why I'd like to meet with you and your brother while you're in Chicago. Not just to apologize properly, but to discuss how Pinnacle can do better. We're expanding our executive team, and frankly, we need perspectives we've been missing. James raised an eyebrow at Julian, who nodded slightly. We could do breakfast tomorrow. Send the details to my assistant. After ending the call, the twins finally headed for their waiting car. As they walked away, Alina turned to her husband. You know, she said thoughtfully, I believe the Carringtons just gave us all a master class in dignity and grace. The senator nodded, watching the brothers depart. And in power, let's not forget that part. Bennett chuckled. I've been in business for 30 years, and I've never seen anyone command respect so effortlessly. It wasn't effortless, Alina said quietly. That's what I'm beginning to understand. A Hamilton ballroom at the Chicago Grand Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and the jewelry of Chicago's elite. The annual Children's Hospital Foundation Gala was the city's premier charity event, where old money and new wealth converged in a display of philanthropy and social positioning. James and Julian Carrington arrived precisely on time, their custom tuxedos drawing appreciative glances. A photographer approached immediately, recognizing the night's honorees. Mr. Carrington and Mr. Carrington. Could we get a photo for the society page? They obliged with practiced smiles, having long ago mastered the public face of success. As they moved through the crowd, Julian nudged his brother. 3 o'clock, the Whitfields. Alina waved from across the room, elegant in midnight blue. The senator stood beside her, deep in conversation with a hospital board member. Let's make the rounds first, James suggested. I want to check in with Dr. Richardson about the pediatric research we're funding. As they navigated the room, exchanging greetings and accepting congratulations, they remained acutely aware of the subtle reactions, the surprise in some eyes, the careful recalibration of assumptions, the occasional coldness from those who resented their presence in this exclusive space. James, Julian! A familiar voice cut through the crowd. Robert Whitman approached, martini in hand. In his 50s, with the trim physique of someone who worked out religiously and the confident bearing of tech wealth, he extended his hand warmly. I'm so glad you made it. Robert, Julian greeted him. Nice to finally meet in person. Likewise, though I wish it had been under better circumstances. Whitman lowered his voice. I've already had a lengthy conversation with our operations team about this morning's incident. And, James prompted, instituting mandatory bias training for all staff, reviewing our reservation protocols, and creating a diversity advisory committee. Whitman paused, which is where I hope you might offer some guidance. Before either twin could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Douglas Bennett and a striking woman in her 40s. Carringtons, allow me to introduce my wife, Veronica, Bennett said. I was just telling her about our illuminating flight together. Veronica Bennett extended her hand. Douglas hasn't stopped talking about your discussion on community-centered development. I think you've given him quite a lot to reconsider. That was the goal, Julian said with a smile. As conversations flowed and dinner approached, the twins were directed to the Whitfields' table near the stage. Alina had thoughtfully arranged the seating to include Dr. Lisa Richardson, the chief of pediatric oncology who had overseen the Hamilton wing development. The research laboratory you funded is already attracting top talent, Dr. Richardson told them as they took their seats. We've just recruited Dr. Miyazaki from Stanford. His work on immunotherapy is groundbreaking. That's exactly what we hoped for, Julian said. Creating a center of excellence that will develop treatments for children everywhere, not just those who can afford specialized care. Alina, seated across from them, leaned forward. I've been meaning to ask why the Hamilton wing. Is there a connection to the name? The twins exchanged a glance. Our grandmother's maiden name, James explained. She raised us after our parents died. Everything we've achieved we owe to her strength and sacrifice. She worked 3 jobs to keep us in good schools, Julian added. Cleaned offices at night, cared for elderly patients during the day, and somehow still had time to check our homework and attend every school event. She sounds remarkable, Alina said softly. She was, James said. She passed away 5 years ago just as our firm was beginning to see real success. We promised her we'd use what we built to open doors for others. The vulnerability in this admission created a moment of genuine connection around the table. Even the senator seemed moved. To Grandmother Hamilton, Dr. Richardson said, raising her glass, whose legacy will help countless children fight cancer. As they toasted, the hospital board president approached the microphone on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're about to begin our program, culminating in the presentation of this year's Hope Award to the extraordinary Carrington brothers. The formal portion of the evening proceeded with the usual speeches and fundraising appeals. A video presentation showed children in the oncology ward, their brave faces highlighting the importance of the night's cause. When the hospital board president returned to the stage to introduce the Carringtons, the room fell silent in anticipation. This year's Hope Award honors 2 remarkable men whose generosity has transformed pediatric cancer care in our region. Their $50 million gift, the largest in our hospital's history, has established the Hamilton Wing for Advanced Pediatric Oncology, a state-of-the-art facility that will save countless young lives. The spotlight found James and Julian at their table. But what makes this gift truly special is the story behind it. 20 years ago, the Carrington family faced the devastating diagnosis of childhood leukemia when Kayla Carrington, sister to our honorees, was given just months to live. Through an experimental treatment protocol at Children's Hospital, she survived and today serves as a pediatric oncologist herself. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. James and Julian Carrington could have simply written a check. Instead, they immersed themselves in every aspect of the wing's development, from research priorities to family support services. They insisted that 30% of beds be reserved for families without adequate insurance, and they established an endowment to ensure no child would be turned away for financial reasons. The president gestured toward the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our Hope Award recipients, James and Julian Carrington. Applause filled the ballroom as the brothers made their way to the stage. Standing side by side at the podium, they presented a powerful image of success with purpose. Julian spoke first. Thank you for this honor, which we accept on behalf of our sister Kayla, our grandmother Dorothy Hamilton, and every family fighting the battle against childhood cancer. James continued. When Kayla was diagnosed, our grandmother would carry her into the hospital for treatments, often coming straight from an overnight shift. She would sit for hours, holding Kayla's hand through the pain, telling her stories about a future where anything was possible. We're here today, Julian added, because someone believed that a black girl from a working-class family deserved access to cutting-edge medical care, that her life mattered just as much as any other child's. The Hamilton Wing isn't just a building, James said, his voice strengthening. It's a promise that excellence in healthcare shouldn't be determined by zip code, income, or race. It's a commitment that every child deserves the same chance our sister was given. As they concluded their remarks and accepted the Crystal Award, the applause was thunderous. Many in the audience rose to their feet, moved by the brothers' eloquence and the genuine emotion behind their philanthropy. Returning to their table, they found Alina Whitfield dabbing at her eyes with a linen napkin. That was beautiful, she said. Truly. The senator reached across the table to shake their hands. Remarkable speech, gentlemen, remarkable work. Throughout the remainder of the evening, a steady stream of guests approached to congratulate the twins and discuss potential collaborations. Business cards were exchanged, connections made, doors opened. For many in the room, the Carringtons had transcended categories. They weren't just successful black businessmen anymore, but respected peers whose approval now carried weight. Late in the evening, as the crowd began to thin, Captain Mercer appeared at their table, no longer in uniform, but in a dark suit. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "I just wanted to congratulate you both. The work you're doing for those children, it's extraordinary." "Thank you, Captain," Julian said. "Are you involved with the hospital as well?" Mercer nodded. "My nephew was treated here 3 years ago, brain tumor. The care he received was incredible." "And how is he now?" James asked. "In remission, thank God." Mercer hesitated. "Look, about this morning, we've moved past it," Julian assured him. "I haven't," Mercer said firmly. "What happened was wrong, and it's made me realize I've been carrying biases I never fully acknowledged. I've spent the day thinking about how many other travelers I might have misjudged over the years." James studied him. "Awareness is the first step toward change, Captain, which is why I've decided to help lead the diversity initiative Mr. Whitman mentioned," Mercer said. "If you're willing to advise us, I'd welcome the opportunity to learn and do better." The twins exchanged a glance, silently communicating as they'd done since childhood. Julian turned back to Mercer. "We'd be happy to contribute, Captain. Send us the details and we'll connect you with our corporate culture consultants." As Mercer thanked them and departed, Eleanor leaned forward. "You know, when I first saw you two this morning, I made assumptions I'm not proud of. I thought I knew exactly who you were based on how you looked." "That's not unusual, Mrs. Whitfield," James said. "No, but it should be," she replied. "I've sat on diversity committees and charity boards for years, thinking I was part of the solution. But today made me realize I've never really examined my own biases. Self-awareness is uncomfortable," Julian acknowledged, "but necessary for growth. Which is why," Eleanor continued, "I'd like to propose a partnership between the Whitfield Foundation and your sister's clinic in Baltimore. No strings attached, no photo opportunities, just meaningful support for important work." James raised an eyebrow. "That's unexpected. Consider it the beginning of my own education," Eleanor said. "I can't change overnight, but I can commit to doing better." As the gala wound down and goodbyes were exchanged, the Carrington brothers found themselves at the center of a transformed social landscape. The morning's discrimination had evolved into an evening of connection, understanding, and potential collaboration. Outside the hotel, as they waited for their car, Julian turned to his brother. "Quite a day," James nodded. "From being blocked from a flight to receiving a standing ovation." "Do you think anything will actually change?" Julian wondered. "Or is this just temporary goodwill that fades when we're no longer in the room?" "Some of both," James said realistically. "But even small shifts matter. For some people in that ballroom tonight, we've become human in a way we weren't before." Their car arrived, and as they slid into the backseat, James's phone buzzed with a text. He smiled as he read it. "Kayla says congratulations, and that she's already received a call from Eleanor Whitfield about funding for the clinic." Julian raised an eyebrow. "That was fast. Maybe some people really do want to change." As the car pulled away from the glittering hotel, the brothers settled into a comfortable silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new barriers to break, new assumptions to overcome. But tonight had offered a glimpse of what was possible when people moved beyond their preconceptions to see each other's full humanity. For the Carrington twins, it was one more step in a lifelong journey, not just of personal success, but of creating space for others to follow. The true measure of their impact wouldn't be in buildings named after their family or awards on their shelves, but in the subtle shifts in perception that could, over time, create a more equitable world. The car turned onto Lake Shore Drive, Chicago's skyline glittering against the night sky. Ahead lay their hotel, tomorrow's meetings, and the continuing work of building bridges across the divides of race, class, and assumption. Behind them, a ballroom full of people who had begun to see beyond the surface to the complex, accomplished men beneath. It wasn't perfect progress, but it was progress nonetheless. 6 months later, a sleek Pinnacle charter plane touched down in Baltimore. Among its passengers were Eleanor Whitfield, Captain Richard Mercer, and Robert Whitman, all there for the opening of the expanded Carrington-Hamilton Community Health Center in East Baltimore. The facility, once a small clinic started by Dr. Kayla Carrington, had been transformed through a partnership between the Carrington Foundation, the Whitfield Foundation, and Pinnacle Charter's New Community Initiative. What began as an uncomfortable encounter on a flight had evolved into a collaborative effort to address healthcare disparities in underserved communities. As they disembarked, Eleanor spotted the Carrington twins waiting on the tarmac. Beside them stood a woman in a white coat, Kayla Carrington, now the medical director of the expanded center. "Welcome to Baltimore," Julian greeted them warmly. Alina embraced each brother, then turned to Kayla. "Dr. Carrington, it's an honor to finally meet you in person." Kayla, with the same confident bearing as her brothers but a more open expression, smiled. "The honor is mine, Mrs. Whitfield. Your foundation's support has allowed us to triple our capacity." Captain Mercer stepped forward. "Dr. Carrington, I've heard so much about your work. It's a privilege to be part of this effort." "Captain," Kayla acknowledged him. "My brothers told me about your nephew. How is he doing?" "Cancer-free for 3 years now," Mercer said proudly. "He's actually volunteering at Children's Hospital as a patient buddy." Robert Whitman joined the group. "Shall we head to the center? I understand we have a full tour scheduled before the ribbon cutting." As they walked to the waiting cars, Alina fell into step beside James. "I have to admit, when I first reached out about funding Kayla's clinic, I wasn't sure you'd accept, after how we initially treated you." "We don't hold grudges, Mrs. Whitfield," James replied. "Not when there's important work to be done." "Alina, please," she insisted. "After 6 months of working together, I think we can use first names." James smiled. "Alina, then." In the months since the charity gala, much had changed. The Carrington twins had joined Pinnacle's board of advisors, helping to reshape the company's culture and hiring practices. Alina had restructured the Whitfield Foundation's grant-making process to address systemic inequities in funding. Captain Mercer had become an unexpected advocate for change within Pinnacle, leading workshops on recognizing and addressing unconscious bias. What began as a conflict had transformed into a partnership that was creating tangible impact. At the health center, a modest building in a neighborhood rarely visited by private charter passengers, Kayla led the tour with evident pride. The facility gleamed with new equipment, expanded examination rooms, and a state-of-the-art cancer screening area. "Before the expansion, we could serve about 50 patients a day," Kayla explained. "Now we're equipped for over 200 with specialized care for pediatric patients and a full oncology support program." Alina noted the photographs lining the hallway, diverse faces of staff and patients, community events, and a particularly striking image of an elderly black woman with a warm smile. "Our grandmother," Julian said, noticing her attention. "Dorothy Hamilton, the heart of everything we do." "She would be so proud," Alina said softly. "She would be practical," James corrected with a smile. "She'd ask how many more people we could help if we opened another wing." The tour concluded in a community room where local residents had gathered for the ceremony. Children played in a colorful waiting area while their parents chatted with staff members. Medical students from nearby Johns Hopkins, where Kayla held a teaching position, assisted with pre-opening preparations. As the time for the ribbon cutting approached, Kayla gathered everyone in the main lobby. "Before we officially open these doors, I want to thank those who made this expansion possible. My brothers, whose vision and resources laid the foundation, the Whitfield Foundation, whose partnership extended our reach, and Pinnacle Charter, whose community health initiative is funding our mobile screening unit." She paused, looking around the diverse gathering. "But most importantly, I want to thank this community, which has trusted us with their care for the past 5 years. This center isn't just for you, it's yours." As applause filled the lobby, Robert Whitman stepped forward. "If I may add something, 6 months ago, I received a phone call about an incident on one of our flights, an incident rooted in bias and assumption. That call could have ended with an apology and nothing more. Instead, it began a journey that led us here today." He gestured to the Carrington siblings. "These remarkable individuals chose to transform a moment of discrimination into an opportunity for education and growth. They could have simply walked away. Instead, they engaged, challenged, and ultimately partnered with us to create meaningful change." Captain Mercer nodded in agreement. "They taught us that true diversity isn't just about who's in the room, it's about whose voices are heard, whose ideas are implemented, and who has the power to shape outcomes." Alina stepped to Kayla's side as the ribbon was brought forward. "In my 62 years, I've sat on countless committees and boards discussing equality and inclusion. But it wasn't until I had to confront my own biases that I truly began to understand what that means in practice." Together, Kayla Carrington and Alina Whitfield cut the ribbon, symbolically opening not just a healthcare facility, but a new model of collaboration across the divisions of race, class, and privilege. The assembled crowd cheered as the doors officially opened to welcome the day's first patients. Later, as the formal festivities concluded and the center began its work, the Carrington twins stood outside, watching their sister in her element directing staff, greeting patients, living the purpose that had driven their family's journey. "Do you think Grandma would believe any of this?" Julian asked quietly. James smiled. "She always said we could go as far as our minds could imagine, but I think even she would be surprised by how a bad morning led to all this good." "It's not just about the funding or the building," Julian reflected. "It's about creating spaces where people can move beyond their assumptions and connect as human beings." "One flight at a time," James agreed. Inside the center, Kayla was showing Captain Mercer the pediatric treatment room, designed with bright colors and child-friendly equipment to ease young patients' anxiety. "This reminds me of the room where my nephew received treatment," Mercer said. "He was so scared at first. By the end, he didn't want to leave because he'd made friends with the nurses." "Children are resilient," Kayla agreed. "They teach us how to face fear with courage." "Your brothers mentioned you were just 8 when you were diagnosed," Mercer said. "That must have been terrifying," Kayla nodded. "It was, but it also showed me who I wanted to become. Every doctor who treated me with dignity, every nurse who saw me as a child first and a patient second, they shaped my understanding of what healthcare should be. And now you're creating that experience for others." "That's the goal," Kayla said. "To ensure that every patient who walks through those doors is seen, heard, and valued, regardless of where they come from or what they look like." In the administrative office, Alina and Robert were finalizing details for the ongoing partnership between their organizations. "The 3-year funding commitment is just the beginning," Alina assured him. "Thomas and I are restructuring our foundation to focus more deeply on healthcare equity. And Pinnacle is expanding the community initiative to other cities," Robert added. "We're already looking at sites in Detroit and Philadelphia." "It's remarkable what can happen when we step outside our usual circles," Alina observed. "6 months ago, I wouldn't have imagined myself so deeply involved in community healthcare. 6 months ago, I was running a charter service that primarily catered to wealthy white clients," Robert acknowledged. "Now we're using a percentage of every flight's proceeds to fund health screenings in underserved communities." Alina smiled. "The Carringtons have a way of expanding one's horizons." Outside, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, James and Julian prepared to leave for their next meeting. They had built a successful financial empire, but their true legacy was becoming clear, not just in buildings named after their family, but in the connections they forged across divides, the assumptions they challenged, and the spaces they created for authentic human engagement. The morning they had been blocked from that charter flight could have ended differently. It could have been just another story of discrimination, another barrier faced and navigated. Instead, it had become a catalyst for transformation, not just for them, but for everyone involved. As they walked to their car, Julian glanced back at the health center with its new sign, Carrington Hamilton Community Health Center, healing with dignity. "Not a bad outcome from a canceled flight," he remarked. James smiled. "Grandma always said everything happens for a reason." "She also said it's what you do with what happens that defines you," Julian reminded him. Together, they had taken a moment of bias and transformed it into an opportunity for growth, not just for themselves, but for a web of connections that would continue to expand long after they drove away. In challenging others to see beyond their assumptions, they had created space for genuine understanding to take root and flourish. The journey was far from over. There would be other flights, other barriers, other moments of prejudice to navigate. But each encounter carried the possibility of transformation, the chance to build bridges where walls had stood before. As their car pulled away from the health center, the Carrington twins carried with them the knowledge that true change happens not in grand gestures, but in individual hearts and minds, one conversation at a time. Their call to the owner had indeed stunned the crew that morning, but the real surprise had been what happened after, when judgment gave way to connection, and strangers became partners in creating a more equitable world. It wasn't the end of the story. In many ways, it was just the beginning.